So, all right. Are we ready? We are going to read 73 and then continue on and see how far we can get. Yeah? So, I am Lady Rain. This is the Reader's Nook, and we are on The Stand, and we are reading chapter 73. We're going to finish up the last few pages, and then we're going to go into chapter 74, and we are almost done. And remember, tomorrow morning I will not be reading, but I should be home in the evening, and if I am not, then we will finish up Sunday. So if I don't show up tomorrow at all, I do apologize. My daughter's finishing up her house, and we're getting it all cleaned out as far as any garbage that the old tenants left before she moved in. And so we're cleaning out the basement and the yard and the back area, so it's going to take us a little bit. But we're going to try to help out, and plus we're going to fix our caliper. Well, I'm not going to, my husband is, but him and his friend are going to change the caliper, so it'll be, no, thank you. Yeah, they can hear it, but it's faint because I'm right here and that's up there. And oddly, it doesn't even you can't hardly hear it. Yeah, I was shocked. Yeah, I was really shocked at how low it was. So go ahead and leave my pierogies in there and I'll eat when I'm done. Okay? All right, shall we start? Flagg felt terror seep. Okay, now this is what happened. Someone was coming through the crowd, as if in answer to the dark man's challenge. Okay? If anybody else had something to say. Now, if there is anyone who disagrees with my sentence, if so, let him speak now. They heard a faint engine and there was somebody coming through the crowd. Are they crunchy on top? Go ahead and put them in for a couple more minutes, sweetie. We switched them around, remember? Yeah. Flagg felt terror seep into the chambers of his heart. It was a terror of the unknown and the unexpected. He had foreseen everything, even Whitney's foolish spur-of-the-moment speech. He had foreseen everything but this. The crowd, his crowd, was parting, peeling back. There was a scream, high, clear, and freezing. Someone broke and ran, then someone else. And then the crowd, already in an emotional hair-trigger, broke and stampeded. "Hold still!" Flagg cried at the top of his voice. But it was useless. The crowd had become a strong wind, and not even the dark man could stop the wind. Terrible, impotent rage rose in him, joining the fear, making some new and volatile mix. It had gone wrong again. In the last minute, it had somehow gone wrong. Like the old lawyer in Oregon, the woman slitting her throat on the window glass, and Nadine falling. They ran, scattering to all points of the compass, pounding across the lawn of the MGM Graham, across the street, toward the Strip. They had seen the final guest, arrived at last like some grim vision out of a horror tale. They had seen, perhaps, the rattled face of some final awful retribution. And they had seen what the returning wanderer had brought with him. As the crowd melted, Randall Flagg also saw, as did Larry and Ralph, and a frozen Lloyd Henrid, who was still holding the torn scroll in his hands. It was Donald Merwin Elbert, now known as the Trash Can Man, now and forever, world without end, hallelujah, amen. He was behind the wheel of a long, dirty electric cart. The cart's heavy-duty bank of batteries was nearly drained dry. The cart was humming and buzzing and lurching. Trash Can Man bobbed back and forth on the open seat like a mad marionette. He was in the last stages of radiation sickness. His hair was gone, his arms poking out of the tatters of his shirt. were covered with open, running sores. His face was a catered red soup from which one desert-faded blue eye peered with a terrible, pitiful intelligence. His teeth were gone, his nails were gone, his eyelids were frayed flaps. He looked like a man who had driven his electric cart out of the dark and burning subterranean mouth of hell itself. Flagg watched him come, frozen. His smile was gone. His high, rich color was gone. His face was suddenly a window made of pale, clear glass. Trash Can Man's voice bubbled ecstatically up from his thin chest. I brought it. I brought you the fire. Please, I'm sorry. It was Lloyd who moved. He took one step forward, then another. Trashy. Trash baby. His voice was a croak. That single eye moved, painfully seeking Lloyd out. Lloyd, that you? It's me, Trash. Lloyd was shaking violently all over, the way Whitney had been shaking. Hey, what you got there? Is it? It's the big one, Trash said happily. It's the A-bomb. He began to rock back and forth on the seat of the electric cart like a convert at a revival meeting. The A-bomb, the big one, the big fire, my life for you. Take it away, Trash, Lloyd whispered. It's dangerous. It's hot. Take it away. Make him get rid of it, Lloyd. Make him get rid of it, Lloyd. The dark man, who was now the pale man, whined. Make him take it back where he got it. Make him. Trash Can's one operative eye grew puzzled. Where is he? He asked. And then his voice rose to an agonized howl. Where is he? He's gone. Where is he? What did you do to him? Lloyd made one last supreme effort. Trash, you've got to get rid of that thing, you. And suddenly, Ralph shrieked, Larry, Larry, the hand of God! Ralph's voice was transported in a terrible joy. His eyes shone. He was pointing into the sky. Larry looked up. He saw the ball of electricity Flagg had flicked from the end of his finger. It had grown to a tremendous size. It hung in the sky, jittering toward Trash Can Man, giving off sparks like hair. Larry realized dimly that the air was now so full of electricity that every hair on his own body was standing on end. And the thing in the sky did look like a hand. No, the dark man wailed. Larry looked at him, but Flagg was no longer there. He had a bare impression of something monstrous standing in front of where Flagg had been. And this is what they're showing that Trash looked like in his last moments, okay, when he showed up. Something slumped and hunched and almost without shape. Something with enormous yellow eyes slit by dark cat pupils. Then it was gone. Larry saw Flagg's clothes, the jacket, the jeans, the boots, standing upright with nothing in them. For a split second, they held the shape of the body that had been inside them, and then they collapsed. The crackling blue fire in the air rushed at the yellow electric cart that Trash Can Man had somehow driven back from the Nellis Range. He had lost hair and thrown up blood and finally vomited out his own teeth as the radiation sickness sank deeper and deeper into him. Yet he had never faltered in his resolve to bring it back to the dark man. You could say that he had never flagged in his determination. The blue ball of fire flung itself into the back of the cart, seeking what was there, drawn to it. Oh shit, we're all fucked, Henry cried. He put his hands over his head and fell to his knees. Oh God, thank you, God, Larry thought. I will fear no evil. I will Silent white light filled the world, and the righteous and the unrighteous alike were consumed in that unholy fire. Stu woke up from a night of broken rest at dawn and lay shivering, even with Kojak curled up next to him. The morning sky was coldly blue. but in spite of the shivers, he was hot. He was running a fever. Sick, he muttered, and Kojak looked up at him. He wagged his tail and then trotted into the gully. He brought back a piece of dead wood and laid it at Stu's feet. I said sick, not stick, but I guess it'll do, Stu told him. He sent Kojak out for a dozen more sticks. Soon he had a fire blazing. Even sitting close would not drive the shivers away, although sweat was rolling down his face. It was the final irony. He had the flu or something very like it. He had come down with it 2 days after Glenn, Larry, and Ralph had left. For another 2 days the flu had seemed to consider him. Was he worth taking? Apparently he was. Little by little he was getting worse, and this morning he felt very bad indeed. Among the odds and ends in his pockets, Stu found a stub of pencil, his notebook, all the Free Zone organizational staff that had one, since the vital stuff of life itself now seemed mildly foolish. All the Free Zone stuff that had once seemed vital. And his keyring. He had puzzled over the keyring for a long time, coming back to it over the last few days again and again, constantly surprised by the strong ache of sadness and nostalgia. This one was to his apartment. This one to his locker key was his locker key. This one was a spare for his car, a 77 Dodge, with a lot of rust. So far as he knew, it was still parked behind the apartment building at 31 Thompson Street in Arnett. He attached the key ring. Also attached to the key ring was a cardboard address, card encased in lucite. Stu Redmond, 31 Thompson Street. Phone 713-555-6283, it read. He took the keys off the ring, bounced them thoughtfully on the palm of his hand for a moment, and then threw them away. The last of the man went into the dry wash and clinked into a dry clump of sage, where it would stay, he supposed, until the end of time. He slipped the cardboard address card out of the lucite and then ripped a blank page from his notebook. Dear Franny, he wrote at the top. He told her all that had happened up until he had broken his leg. He told her that he hoped to see her again, but that he doubted it was in the cards. The best he could hope for was that Kojak would find the zone again. He wiped tears absently from his face with the heel of his hand and wrote that he loved her. I expect you to mourn me and then go on, he wrote. You and the baby have to go get on. That's the most important thing now. He signed, folded it small, and slipped the note into the address slot in the lucite square. Then he attached the key ring to Kojak's collar. Good dog, he said. And when that was done, you want to go look around, find a rabbit or something? Trying to get the spit out of my face is what I'm doing. Kojak bounded up the slope. If you need to, put Phoebe in the crate. Bounded up the slope where Stu had broken his leg and was gone. Stu watched his progress with a mixture of bitterness and amusement. Then picked up the 7-Up can Kojak. Phoebe, bed, go. Go. Go, go. 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 Come, where's the gate? In. Go. Go close the other side. Come. No, come here. All right, you want to go in there? Go in there. That's fine. Never mind. I'm not worried about Harley. I was worried about Phoebe. Huh? It's all right. I usually just spray them. That's what they look like when they're boiled. Then picked up the 7-Up bottle, 7-Up can Kojak had brought him on one trip yesterday in lieu of a stick. He had filled it with muddy water from the ditch. When the water stood, the mud silted down to the bottom. It made a gritty drink, but as his mother would have said, it was a whole lot grittier when there was none. He drank slowly, slaking his thirst bit by bit. It hurt to swallow. Life sure is a bitch, he muttered, and then had to laugh at himself. For a moment or two, he let his fingers fret at the swellings high on his neck, just under his jaw. Then he lay back, splinted leg in front of him, and dozed. He woke with a start about an hour later, clutching at the sandy earth in sleepy panic. Had he had a nightmare? If so, it seemed to still be going on. The ground was moving slowly under his hands. Earthquake? We got an earthquake here? For a moment he clung to the idea that it must be delirium, that his fever had come back while he dozed. But looking toward the gully, he saw the dirt was sliding down in small muddy sheets. Bouncing pebbles, flashed mica and quartz glints at his startled eyes. And then a faint, dull thudding noise came. It seemed to push its way into his ears. A moment later he was heaving for breath, as if most of the air had suddenly been pushed out of the gully the flash flood had cut. There was a whining sound above him. Kojak stood silhouetted against the western edge of the cut, hunkered down with his tail between his legs. He was staring west toward Nevada. Kojak! Stu cried in panic. That thudding noise had terrified him. It was as if God had suddenly stamped his foot down on the desert floor somewhere not too distant. Kojak bounded down the slope and joined him, whining. As Stu passed a hand down the dog's back, he found Kojak trembling. He had to see. He had to. A sudden feeling of surety came to him. What had been meant to happen was happening right now. I'm going up, boy, Stu muttered. He crawled to the western edge of the gully. It was a little steeper, but it offered more handholds. He had thought of the last 3 days that he might be able to get up there, but he hadn't seen the point. He was sheltered from the worst of the wind at the bottom of the cut, and he had water, but now he had to get up there. He had to see. He dragged his splinted leg behind him like a club. He got up on his hands and craned his neck to see the top. It looked very high, very far away. There's nothing wrong then, I'll stop. It's kind of like 9 minutes straight. Oh, he let his hair grow out. Can't do it, boy, he muttered to Kojak, and started trying anyway. A fresh pile of rubble had piled up at the bottom as a result of the earthquake, or whatever it was. Stu pulled himself over it and then began to inch his way up the slope, using his hands and his left knee. He made 12 yards, then lost 6 of them before he could grab a quartz outcropping and stopped his slide. Nope, never make it, he panted and rested. 10 minutes later, he started again and made another 10 yards. He rested, went again, came to a place with no holds, and had to inch to the left until he found one. Kojak walked beside him, no doubt wondering what this fool was up to, leaving his water and his nice warm fire. Warm, too warm. The fever must be coming up again, but at least the shivering had subsided. Fresh sweat was running down his face and arms. His hair, dusty and oily, hung in his eyes. Lord, I'm burning up. Must be 100 or 102, 103. He happened to glance at Kojak. It took almost a minute for what he was seeing to sink in. Kojak was panting. It wasn't fever. Or not just fever, because Kojak was hot too. Overhead, a squadron of birds suddenly flocked, wheeling aimlessly and squawking. They felt it too. Whatever it is, the birds feel it too. He began to crawl again, fear lending him additional strength. An hour passed, too. He fought for every foot, every inch. By 1 o'clock that afternoon, he was only 6 feet below the edge. He could see jags of paving jutting out above him, only 6 feet, but the grade here was very steep and smooth. He tried once to just wiggle up like a garter snake, but loose gravel, the underbedding of the interstate, had begun to rattle out from beneath him, and now he was afraid that if he tried to move at all, he would go all the way to the bottom again, probably breaking his other damn leg in the process. Stuck, he muttered. Good fucking show. Now what? Now what became obvious very quickly. Even without moving around, the earth was beginning to shift downward beneath him. He slipped an inch and clawed for purchase with his hands. His broken leg was thudding heavily, and he had not thought to pocket Glenn's pills. He slipped another 2 inches, then 5. His left foot was now dangling over space. Only his hands were holding him, and as he watched, they began to slip, digging 10 little furrows in the damp ground. Kojak, he cried miserably, expecting nothing. But suddenly Kojak was there. Stu flung his arms around his neck blindly, not expecting to be saved, but only grabbing what there was to be grabbed.
Mom, do you want some? Some pokies?
Yes, and so does your dad, so you'll wait until we're done before
I know.
Wait till we get some before you have more.
I'm just going to
How many did you have?
couple.
That doesn't answer.
I think 5.
If you had 5, count how many are left.
1, 2, 3,
Like a drowning,
5.
what there was to be grabbed.
There's 5. There's 5 left on the circle.
How many are left on the other pan? He grabbed what there was to grab like a drowning man. Kojak made no effort to throw him off. He dug in. For a moment they were frozen, like living sculpture. Then Kojak began to move, digging for inches, claws clicking against small stones and bits of gravel. You need to tell me how many are on that plate. Why don't you take 2 plates and put 10 on each plate?
You do
What?
I just...
All right. All right. Claws clicking against small stones and bits of gravel. Pebbles rattled into Stu's face and he shut his eyes. Kojak dragged him, panting like an air compressor in Stu's right ear.
Hey, Mom.
Huh? Okay. He slitted his eyes open and saw they were nearly at the top. Kojak's head was down. His back legs were working furiously. He gained 4 more inches and it was enough. With a desperate cry, Stu let go of Kojak's neck and grabbed an outcrop of paving. It snapped off in his hands. He grabbed another one. 2 fingernails peeled back like wet decals, and he cried out. Pain was exquisite, galvanizing. He scrambled up, pistoning with his one good leg, and at last, somehow, lay panting on the surface of I-70, his eyes shut. Kojak was beside him then. He whined and licked Stu's face. Slowly then, Stu sat up and looked west. He looked for a long time, oblivious of the heat that was still rushing against his face in warm, bloating waves. Oh my God, he said, at last in a weak, breaking voice. Look at that, Kojak. Larry, Glenn, they're gone. God, everything's gone, all gone. The mushroom cloud stood up on the horizon like a clenched fist on the end of a long, dusty forearm. It was swirling, fuzzy at the edges, beginning to dissipate. It was backlighted in sullen orange-red, as if the sun had decided to go down in the early afternoon. The firestorm, he thought. They were all dead in Las Vegas. Someone had fiddled when he should have faddled, and a nuclear weapon had gone off, and one hellish big one. Okay. And one hellish big one, from the look and the feel. Maybe a whole stockpile of them had gone. Glenn, Larry, Ralph. Even if they hadn't reached Vegas yet. Bless you. Even if they were, bless you, still walking. Surely they were close enough to have been baked alive. Close beside him, Kojak whimpered unhappily. Fallout. Which way is the wind going to blow it? Did it matter? He remembered his note to Fran. It was important that he add what had happened. If the wind blew the fallout east, it might cause them problems. But more than that, they had to know that if Las Vegas had been the Dark Man's staging area, it was gone now. The people had been vaporized along with all the deadly toys that it had just been laying around, waiting for someone to pick them up. He ought to add all of that to the note, but not now. He was too tired now. The climb had exhausted him, and the stupendous sight of that dissipating mushroom cloud had exhausted him even more. He felt no jubilation, only dull and grinding weariness. He lay down on the pavement, and his last thought before drifting off to sleep was, how many megatons? He didn't think anyone would ever know, or want to know. He woke after 6. The mushroom cloud was gone. The western sky was an angry pinkish red, like a bright wheel of burned flesh. Stu hauled himself over into the breakdown lane and lay down, exhausted all over again. The shakes were back, and the fever. He touched his forehead with his wrist and tried to gauge the temperature there. He guessed it was well over 100 degrees. Kojak came out of the early evening with a rabbit in his jaws. He laid it at Stu's feet and wagged his tail, waiting to be complimented. Good dog, Stu said tiredly. That's a good dog. Kojak's tail wagged faster. Yes, I'm a pretty good dog. He seemed to agree. And he remained looking at Stu, seeming to wait for something. Part of the ritual was incomplete. Stu tried to think of what it was. His brain was moving very slowly. While he was sleeping, someone seemed to have poured molasses all over his interior gears. Good dog, he repeated, and looked at the dead rabbit. Then he remembered. Although he wasn't sure he had his matches anymore. Fetch, Kojak, he said, almost to please the dog. Kojak bounced away and soon returned with a good chunk of dry wood. He had his matches, but a good breeze had sprung up and his hands were shaking badly. It took a long time to get the fire going. He got the kindling he had stripped lighted on the 10th match, and then the breeze gusted roughly, puffing out the flames. Stu rebuilt it carefully, shielding it with his body and his hands. He had 8 remaining matches and a LaSalle Business School folder. He cooked the rabbit, gave Kojak his half, and could eat only a little of his share. He tossed Kojak what was left. Kojak didn't pick it up. He looked at it, then whined uneasily at Stu. Go on, boy, I can't. Kojak ate up. Stu looked at him and shivered. His 2 blankets were, of course, below. The sun went down, and the western sky was grotesque with color. It was the most spectacular sunset Stu had ever seen in his life, and it was poison. He could remember the narrator of a movie-tone newsreel saying enthusiastically back in the early 60s that there were beautiful sunsets for weeks after a nuclear test, and of course after earthquakes. Kojak came up from the washout with something in his mouth, one of Stu's blankets. He dropped it in Stu's lap. Hey, he said, hugging him unsteadily. You're some kind of dog, you know it? Kojak wagged his tail to show that he knew it. Stu wrapped the blanket around him and moved closer to the fire. Kojak lay next to him, and soon they both slept. But Stu's sleep was light and uneasy, skimming in and out of delirium. Sometime after midnight, he roused Kojak, yelling in his sleep. Help! Stu cried. You better turn off your pumps. He's coming. Black man's coming for you. Better turn off your pumps. He's in an old car yonder. In the old car yonder. Kojak whined uneasily. The man was sick. He could smell the sickness, and mingling with the smell was a new one, a black one. It was the smell the rabbits had on them when he pounced. The smell had been on the wolf he had disemboweled under Mother Abigail's house and Hemmingford home. The smell had been on the towns he had passed through on his way to Boulder and Glen Bateman. It was the smell of death. If he could have attacked it, driven it out of this man, he would have. But it was inside this man. The man drew in good air and sent out that smell of coming death. And there was nothing to do but wait and see it through to the end. Kojak whined again, low, and then slept. Stu woke up the next morning, more feverish than ever. The glands under his jaw had swollen to the size of golf balls. His eyes were hot marbles. I'm dying. Yes, that's affirmative. He called Kojak over and removed the keychain and his note from the Lucid address holder. Printing carefully, he added that what he had seen and replaced the note. He lay back down and slept. And then, somehow, it was nearly dark again. Another spectacular, horrible sunset burned and jittered in the west. And Kojak had brought a gopher for dinner. This the best you could do? Kojak wagged his tail and grinned shamefacedly. Stu cooked it, divided it, and managed to eat his entire half. It was tough, and it was a horrible wild taste. And when he was done, he had a nasty bout of stomach cramps. When I die, I want you to go back to Boulder, he told the dog. You go back and find Franny, okay? Big old dumb dog. Kojak wagged his tail doubtfully. An hour later, Stu's stomach rumbled once in morning. He had just time to roll over on one elbow to avoid fouling himself before his share of the gopher came up in a rush. Shit, he muttered miserably and dozed off. He woke in the small hours and got up on his elbows, his head buzzing with fever. The fire had gone out, he saw. It didn't matter. He was pretty well done up. Some sound in the darkness had awakened him, pebbles and stones. Kojak coming up the embankment from the cut. That's all it was, except that Kojak was beside him sleeping. Even as Stu glanced at him, the dog woke up. His head came off his paws, and a moment later he was on his feet, facing the cut, growling deep in his throat. Rattling pebbles and stones, something coming up. Stu struggled into a sitting position. It's him, he thought. He was there, and somehow he got away. But somehow he got away. Now he's here, and he means to do me before the flu can. Kojak's growl became stronger. His hackles stood. His head was down. The rattled sound was closer now. Stu could hear a low panting sound. There was a pause then, long enough for Stu to arms sweat off his forehead. A moment later, a dark shape humped against the edge of the cut, head and shoulders blotting out of the stars. Kojak advanced, stiff-legged, still growling. Hey, a bewildered but familiar voice said. Hey, is that Kojak? Is it? The growling stopped immediately. Kojak bounded forward, joyful, tail wagging. No, Stu crowed. It's a trick. Croaked. It's a trick, Kojak. But Kojak was jumping up and down on the figure that had finally gained the pavement, and that shape. Something about the shape was also familiar. It advanced towards him with Kojak at his heel. Kojak was volleying joyful barks. Stu licked his lips and got ready to fight if he had to. He thought he could manage one good punch, maybe two. Who is it? He called. Who is it there? The dark figure paused and spoke. Well, it's Tom Collin, that's who. My lord, yes. Moon. That spells Tom Collin. Who's that? Stu, he said, and his voice seemed to come from far away. Everything was far away now. Hello, Tom. It's good to see you. But he didn't see him. Not that night. Stu fainted. He came around at 10 in the morning on October 2nd, although neither he nor Tom knew that was the date. Tom had built a huge bonfire and had wrapped Stu in his sleeping bag and his blankets. Tom himself was sitting by the fire and roasting a rabbit. Kojak lay contentedly on the ground between the two of them. Tom, Stu managed. Tom came over. He had grown a beard, Stu saw. He hardly looked like the man who had left Boulder for the West 5 weeks ago. His blue eyes glinted happily. Stu Redmond, you're awake now, my lord. Yes, I'm glad. Boy, it's good to see you. What did you do to your leg? Hurt it, I guess. I hurt mine once. Jumped off a haystack and broke it, I guess. Did my daddy whip me? My lord, yes. That was before he ran off with Dee Dee Pack-a-Lot. Mine's broken too. And how? Tom, I'm awfully thirsty. Oh, there's water, all kinds. Here. He handed Stu a plastic bottle that might once have held milk. The water was clear, delicious. No grit at all. Stu drank greedily and then threw it all up. Slow and easy does it, Tom said. That's the ticket. Slow and easy. Boy, it's good to see you. Hurt your leg, didn't you? Yes, I broke it. A week ago, maybe longer. He drank more water, and this time it stayed down. But there's more wrong than the leg. I'm bad sick, Tom. Fever. Listen to me. Right? Tom's listening. Just tell me what to do. Tom leaned forward and Stu thought, why, he looks brighter. Is that possible? Where had Tom been? Did he know anything about the judge, about Dana? So many things to talk about. But there was no time now. He was getting worse. There was a deep rattling sound in his chest, like padded chains. Symptoms so much like the superflu. It was really quite funny. I've got to knock down the fever, he said to Tom. That's the first thing. I need aspirin. Do you know aspirin? Sure, aspirin. For fast relief. That's the ticket, all right. You start walking up the road, Tom. Look in the glove box of every car you come to. Look for a first aid kit. It's most likely with a box. It will most likely be a box with a red cross on it. When you find some aspirin in one of those boxes, bring it back here. And if you should find a car with camping gear in it, bring back a tent. Okay? Sure, Tom stood up, aspirin in a tent. Then you'll be all better again, right? Well, it'll be a start. Say, Tom said, how's Nick? I've been dreaming about him. In the dreams he tells me where to go, because in the dreams he can talk. Dreams are funny, aren't they? But when I try to talk to him, he always goes away. He said he's okay, isn't he? Tom looked at Stu anxiously. Not now, Stu said. I can't talk now. Not about that. Just get the aspirin, okay, and then we'll talk. Okay. But fear had settled into Tom's face like a gray cloud. Kojak went to come with Tom. Kojak, want to come with Tom? Kojak did. They walked off together, heading east. Stu lay down and put an arm over his eyes. When Stu slipped back into reality again, it was twilight. Tom was shaking him. Stu, wake up, Stu. He was frightened by the way time seemed to be slipping by in sudden lurches, as if the teeth of a cog on the cog. Good Lord. There we go. On the cog of his personal reality were wearing down. Tom had to help him sit up, and when he was sitting, he had to lean his head between his legs and cough. He coughed so long and hard that he almost passed out again. Tom watched him with alarm. Little by little, Stu got control of himself. He pulled the blankets closer around him, and he was shivering again. What did you find, Tom? Tom held out a first aid kit. Inside were Band-Aids, mercurochrome, and a big bottle of anisin. Stu was shocked to find he could not work the childproof cap. He had to give it to Tom, who finally worried it open. Stu washed down 3 anisin with water from the plastic bottle. And I found this, Tom said. It was a car full of camping stuff, but there was no tent. It was a huge, puffy double sleeping bag, fluorescent orange on the inside, the lining done in a gaudy stars and bars pattern. Yes, that's great, almost as good as a tent. You did fine, Tom. And these, they were in the same car. Tom reached into his jacket and produced half a dozen foil packages. Stu could hardly believe his eyes. Frozen, dried concentrates. Eggs, peas, squash, dried beef. Food, isn't it, Stu? It's got pictures of food on it. Oh, yes. It's food, Stu agreed gratefully. Just about the only kind I can eat, I think. His head was buzzing, and far away at the center of his brain, a sweetly sickening high C hummed on and on. Can we heat some water? We don't have a pot or a kettle. I'll find something. Yeah, fine. Stu? Stu looked into the troubled, miserable face, still a boy's face in spite of the beard, and slowly shook his head. Dead, Tom, he said gently. Nick died almost a month ago. It was a political thing. Assassin, I suppose you'd say. I'm sorry. Tom lowered his head, and in the freshly built up fire, Stu saw his tears fall into his lap. They fell in a gentle silver rain, but he was silent. At last he looked up, his blue eyes brighter than ever. He wiped at them with the heel of his hand. I knew he was, he said huskily. I didn't want to think I knew, but I did. Laws, yes. He kept turning his back and going away. He was my main man, Stu. Did you know that? Stu reached out and touched Tom's big hand. I knew Tom. Yes, he was. Moon. That spells my main man. I miss him awful. But I'm going to see him in heaven. Tom Collin will see him there. And he'll be able to talk, and I will be able to think. Isn't that right? I wouldn't be surprised. It wouldn't surprise me at all, Tom. It was the bad man killed Nick. Tom knows. But God fixed that bad man. I saw it. The hand of God came down out of the sky. There was a cold wind whistling over the floor of the Utah Badlands, and Stu shivered violently in its clasp. Fixed him for what he did to Nick and to the poor judge. Laws, yes. What do you know about the judge, Tom? Dead, up in Oregon. Shot him. Stu nodded wearily. And Dana, do you know anything about that? Tom saw her, but he doesn't know. They gave me a job cleaning up, and when I came back one day, I saw her doing her job. She was up in the air changing the street light bulb. She looked at me, and he fell silent for a moment. And when he spoke again, it was more to himself than to Stu. Did she see Tom? Did she know Tom? Tom doesn't know. Tom thinks she did, but Tom never saw her again. Tom left to go foraging shortly after, taking Kojak with him, and Stu dozed. He returned not with a big tin can, which was the best Stu had hoped for, but with a broiling pan big enough to hold a Christmas turkey. There were treasures in the desert, apparently. Stu grinned in spite of the painful fever blisters that had begun to form on his lips. Tom told him he had gotten the pan from an orange truck with a big U on it. Someone had been fleeing the superflu with all their worldly possessions. Stu guessed. Much good it had done them. Half an hour later, there was food. Stu ate carefully, sticking to the vegetables, watering the concentrates enough to make them gruel. He held everything down and felt a little better, at least for the time being. Not long after supper, he and Tom went to sleep with Kojak between them. Tom, listen to me. Tom hunkered down by Stu's big, fluffy sleeping bag. It was the next morning. Stu had been able to eat only a light breakfast. His throat was sore and badly swollen, all his joints painful. The cough was worse, and the Anacin wasn't doing much of a job knocking back the fever. I gotta get inside and get some medicine into me, or I'm going to die. And it has to be today. Now the closest town is Green River, and that's 60 miles east of here. We'll have to drive. Tom Collin can't drive a car, Stu. Laws, no. Yes, I know. Yeah, I know. It's going to be a chore for me, because as well as being sick as a dog, I broke the wrong freaking leg. What do you mean? Well, never mind right now. It's too hard to explain. We won't even worry about it, because that ain't the first problem. The first problem is getting a car to start. Most of them have been sitting out here 3 months or more. The batteries will be as flat as pancakes. So we'll need a little luck. We've got to find a stalled car with a standard shift at the top of one of these hills. We might do it. It's pretty hilly country. He didn't add that the car would have been kept reasonably tuned, would have to have some gas in it and the ignition key. All those guys on TV might know how to hotwire a car, but Stu didn't have a clue. He looked up at the sky, which was scumming over with clouds. Most of it's on you, Tom. You've got to be my legs. All right, Stu. When we get the car, are we going back to Boulder? Tom wants to go to Boulder, don't you? More than anything, Tom. He looked toward the Rockies, which were a dim shadow on the horizon. Had the snow started falling in the high pass yet? Almost certainly, and if not yet, then soon. Winter came early in this high and forsaken part of the world. It may take a while, he said. How do we start? By making a trevious. A trev. Stu gave Tom his pocket knife. You've got to make holes in the bottom of the sleeping bag, one in each side, on each side. It took them an hour to make the trevis. Tom found a couple of fairly straight sticks to ram down into the sleeping bag and out the holes at the bottom. Tom got some rope from the U-Haul where he had gotten the broiling pan, and Stu used it to secure the sleeping bag to the holes. When it was done, it reminded Stu more of a crazy rickshaw than a travois. Travois, like the ones the Plains Indians had used. Tom picked up the poles and looked doubtfully over his shoulder. Are you in, Stu? Yeah. He wondered how long the seams would hold before unraveling straight up the sides of the bag. How heavy am I, Tommy? Not bad. I can haul you a long way. Giddy up. They started moving. The gully where Stu had broken his leg, where he had been sure he was going to die, fell slowly behind him. Weak though he was, Stu felt a mad sort of exultation. Not there anyway. He was going to die somewhere, and probably soon, but it wasn't going to be alone in that muddy ditch. The sleeping bag swayed back and forth, lulling him. He dozed. Tom pulled him along under a thickening scud of clouds. Bojack padded along beside them. Stu woke up when Tom eased him down. Sorry, Tom said apologetically. I had to rest my arms. He first twirled, then flexed them. You rest all you want, Stu said. Slow and easy wins the race. His head was thudding. He found the Anacin and dry swallowed 2 of them. It felt as if his throat had been lined with sandpaper and some sadistic soul striking matches on it. He checked the sleeping bag seams. As he had expected, they were coming unraveled. But it wasn't too bad yet. They were on a long, gradual upslope, which exactly the sort of thing he had been looking for. On the slope like this, better than 2 miles long, car with a clutch disengaged could get cruising along pretty good. You could try to pop start it in second, maybe even third gear. He looked longingly to the left, where a plum-colored Triumph was parked askew in the breakdown lane. Something skeletal in the bright woolen sweater leaned behind the wheel. Triumph would have a manual transmission, but there was no way in God's world that he would get his splinted leg into that small cabin. How far have we come, Tom? He asked him, but Tom could only shrug. It had been quite a piece anyway, Stu thought. Tom had pulled him for about 3 hours before stopping to rest. It spoke of phenomenal strength. The old landmarks were gone in the distance. Tom, who was built like a young bull, had dragged him maybe 6 or 8 miles while he dozed. You rest all you want, he repeated. Don't knock yourself out. Tom's okay. O and K, that spells okay. Oh, yes, everybody knows that. Tom wolfed a huge lunch, and Stu managed to eat a little. Then they went on. The road continued to curve upward. and Stu began to realize it had to be this hill. If they crested it without finding the right car, it would take them another 2 hours to get to the next one. Then dark. Rain or snow, from the look of the sky. A nice cold night out in the west, and goodbye, Stu Redmond. They came up to a Chevy sedan. Stop, he croaked, and Tom set the Travois down. Go over and look in that car. Count the pedals on the floor. Tell me if there's 2 or 3. Tom trotted over and opened the car door. A mummy in a flowered print dress fell out like someone's bad joke. Her purse fell beside her, scattering cosmetics, tissues, and money. 2, Tom called back to Stu. Okay, we got to go on. Tom came back, took a deep breath, and grabbed the handles of the Travois. A quarter of a mile further along, they came to a VW van. Want me to count the pedals? Tom asked. No, not this time. The van was standing on 3 flats. He began to think they were not going to find it. Their luck was simply not in. They came to a station wagon that had only 1 flat shoe. It could be changed. But like the Chevy sedan, Tom reported, it had only 2 pedals. That meant it was automatic, and that meant it was useless to them. They pushed on. The long hill was flattening out now, beginning to crest. Stu could see 1 more car ahead, one last chance. Stu's heart sank. It was a very old Plymouth, a 1970 at best. For a wonder, it was standing on 4 inflated tires, but it was rust-eaten and battered. Nobody had ever bothered with much in the way of maintenance on this heap. Stu knew its sort well enough from Arnett. The battery would be old and probably cracked. The oil would be blacker than midnight in a mine shift, but there would be a pink fuzzy runner through the steering wheel, and maybe a stuffed poodle with rhinestone eyes and a naughty head on the back shelf. Want me to check? Tom asked. Yeah, I guess so. Beggars can't be choosers, can they? A fine, cold mist had started to drift down from the sky. Tom crossed the road, looked inside the car, which was empty. Stu lay shivering inside the sleeping bag, and at last Tom came back. 3 pedals, he said. Stu tried to think it out. That high, sweet, sour buzzing in his head kept trying to get in his way. The old Plymouth was almost surely a loser. They could not go over to the other side of the hill. They could go on over the other side of the hill, but then all the cars would be pointing the wrong way, uphill. Unless they crossed the medium strip, which was a rocky half-mile wide here. Maybe they could manage to find a standard shift car on the other side. But by then it would be dark. Tom, help me get up. Somehow, Tom helped Stu to his foot without hurting his broken leg too badly. His head thumped and buzzed. Black comets shot across his field of vision, and he nearly passed out. Then he had one arm around Tom's neck. Rest, he muttered. Rest. He had no idea how long they stood that way, Tom supporting him patiently as he swam around in the gray halftones of semi-consciousness. When the world finally came back, Tom was still patiently supporting him. The mist had thickened to a slow, cold drizzle. Tom helped me across to it. Tom put an arm around Stu's waist, and the 2 men staggered across the road. Across to where the old Plymouth stood in the breakdown lane. Hood release, Stu muttered, fumbling in the Plymouth's grill. Sweat rolled down his face. Shudders racked him. He found the hood release, but couldn't pull it up. He guided Tom's hand to it, and at last the hood swung up. The engine was about what Stu had expected, a dirty and indifferently maintained V8. But the battery wasn't as bad as he had feared it would be. It was a Sears, not top of the line, but guaranteed punch. It was February of 91. Struggling against the feverish rush of his thoughts, Stu counted backward and guessed that the battery had been new last May. Go try the horn, he told Tom, and propped himself against the car while Tom leaned into do it. He had heard of drowning men gasping at straws, but he guessed that now he understood. His last chance of surviving this was the rattle trap junkyard refugee. The horn had a loud honk. Okay, then, if there is a key, take the shot. Probably he should have told Tom to check that first, but on second thought, it didn't much matter. If there was no key, they were most likely all through, no matter what. He got the hood down and latched by leaning on all of his weight on it. Then he hopped around to the driver's door and stared in, fully expecting to see an empty ignition slot. But the keys were there, dangling from an imitation leather case with the letters AC on it. Bending in carefully, he turned the key over to accessory. Slowly, the gas gauge needle swung over to a little more than quarter of a tank. Here was a mystery. Why had the car's owner, why had AC pulled over to walk when he could have driven? In his light-headed state, Stu thought of Charles Campion, almost dead, driving into Hap's pumps. Old AC had the super flu, had it bad. Final stages. He pulls over, shuts off his car's engine, not because he's thinking about it, but because it's a long ingrained habit, and gets out. He's delirious, maybe hallucinating. He stumbles out onto the Utah Badlands, laughing and singing and muttering and cackling, and dies there. 4 months later, Stu Redman and Tom Collin happen along, and the keys are in the car, and the batteries relatively fresh, and there's gas. The hand of God. Wasn't that what Tom had said about Vegas? The hand of God came down out of the sky. And maybe God had left this battered 70 Plymouth here for them, like manna in the desert. It was a crazy idea, but no more crazy than the idea of a 100-year-old black woman leading a bunch of refugees into the promised land. And she still had made her own biscuits. He croaked. Right up until the very end, he still made his own biscuits. Or she still made her own biscuits. Something went off out in the kitchen. Stu? What, Stu? Oh, never mind. Move over, Tom. Tom did. Can we ride? He asked hopefully. Stu pushed the driver's seat down so Kojak could hop in, which he did after a careful sniff or two. I don't know. You just better pray this thing starts. Okay, Tom said agreeably. It took Stu 5 minutes to get behind the wheel. He sat at a slant, almost in place where the middle front seat passenger was supposed to sit. Kojak sat attentively in the back seat, panning. The car was littered with McDonald's boxes and Taco Bell wrappers. The interior smelled like an old corn chip. Stu turned the key. The old Plymouth cranked briskly about 20 seconds, and then the starter began to lag. Stu tapped the horn again, and this time there was only a feeble croak. Tom's face fell. "We're not done with her yet," Stu said. He was encouraged. There was juice lurking inside the Sears battery yet. He pushed in the clutch and shifted up to second. "Open your door to get us rolling, and then hop back in," Tom said doubtfully. "Isn't the car pointing in the wrong way?" "Right now it is. But if we can get this old shit heap running, we'll fix that in a hurry." Tom got out, started pushing on the doorpost. The Plymouth began to roll. When the speedometer got up to 5 miles an hour, Stu said, "Hop in, Tom." Tom got in and slammed his door. Stu turned the ignition key to the on position and waited. The steering was power, no good with the engine off, and it took most of his fading strength just to keep the nose of the Plymouth pointed straight down the road. The speedometer needle crawled up to 10, 15, 20. They were rolling silently down the hill. Tom had spent most of the morning dragging him up, dew collected on the windshield. Too late. Stu realized they had left the Trevis behind, 25 miles an hour. It's not running, Stu, Tom said anxiously. 30 miles per hour. High enough. God help us now, Stu said and popped the clutch. The Plymouth bucketed and jerked. The engine coughed into life. Sputtered, missed, stalled. Stu groaned as much with frustration as with a bolt of pain that shot up his shattered leg. Shit fire, he cried, and depressed the clutch again. Pump that gas pedal, Tom. Use your hand. Which one is it? Tom cried anxiously. It's the long one. Tom got down on the floor and pumped the gas pedal twice. The car was picking up speed again, and Stu had to force himself to wait. They were better than halfway down the slope. Now, he shouted and popped the clutch again. The Plymouth roared into life. Kojak barked. Black smoke boiled out of the rusty exhaust pipe and turned blue. Then the car was running. Choppily, missing on 2 cylinders, but really running. Stu shifted to third and popped the clutch again, running all the pedals with his left foot. We're going, Tom, he bellowed. We got us some wheels now, Tom shouted with pleasure. Kojak barked and wagged his tail. In this previous life, the life before Captain Tripp's, when he had been Big Steve, he had ridden often in his master's car. It was nice to be riding again with his new masters. They came to a U-turn between the westbound and eastbound lanes, about 4 miles down the road. Official vehicles only, a stern sign warned. Stu managed to manipulate the clutch well enough to get them around and into the eastbound lanes, having only one bad moment when the car hitched and bucked and threatened to stall. But the engine was warm now, and he eased them through. He got back up to third gear, then relaxed a little, breathing hard, trying to catch up with his heartbeat, which was fast and steady, and thready, fast and thready. The grayness wanted to come back in and swamp him, but he wouldn't let it. A few minutes later, Tom spotted the bright orange sleeping bag that had been Stu's makeshift travois. Bye-bye, Tom called in high good humor. Bye-bye, we're going to Boulder. Laws, yes. I'll be content with Green River tonight, Stu thought. They got there just after dark, Stu moving the Plymouth carefully in low gear through the dark streets, which were dotted with abandoned cars. He parked on the main drag in front of a building that announced itself as the Utah Hotel. It was a dismal frame, building 3 stories high, and Stu didn't think the Waldorf Astoria had anything to worry about in the way of competition just yet. His head was jangling again, and he was flickering in and out of reality. The car had seemed stuffed with people at times during the last 20 miles. Nick Andros, Norm Bruant. He had looked over once, and it had seemed that Chris Ortega, the bartender at the Indian Head, was riding shotgun. Tired. Had he ever been so tired? In there, he muttered. We're going to stay the night, Nicky. I'm done up. It's Tom, Stu. Tom Cullen. Laws, yes. Tom, yeah, we got to stop. Can you help me in? Sure. Getting this old car to run, that was great. I'll have another beer, Stu told him. And ain't you got a cigarette? I'm dying for a smoke. He fell forward over the wheel. Tom got out and carried him into the hotel. The lobby was damp and dark, but there was a fireplace and a half-filled wood box beside it. Tom set Stu down on the threadbare sofa below a great stuffed moose head, and then set about building a fire while Kojak padded around, sniffing at things. Stu's breath came slow and raspy. He muttered occasionally, and every now and then he would scream something unintelligible, freezing Tom's blood. He kindled a monster blaze and then went looking around. He found pillows and blankets. He found pillows and blankets for himself and Stu. He pushed the soft sofa. Sofa Stu was on a little closer to the fire, and then Tom bedded down next to him. Kojak lay on the other side, so that they bracketed the sick man with their heat. Tom lay looking at the ceiling, which was scrolled tin and laced with cobwebs at the corners. Stu was very sick. It was a worrisome thing. If he woke up again, Tom would ask him what to do about the sickness. But suppose he didn't wake up. Outside, the wind had picked up and went howling past the hotel. Rain lashed at the windows. By midnight, after Tom had gone to sleep, the temperature had dropped another 4 degrees, and the sound turned to a gritty slate of steel. Far away to the west, the storm's outer edges were urging a vast cloud of radiation pollution towards California, where more would die. At some time after 2 in the morning, Kojak raised his head and whined uneasily. Tom Collin was getting up. His eyes were wide and blank. Kojak whined again, but Tom took no notice of him. He went to the door and let himself out into the screaming night. Kojak went to the hotel lobby window and put his paws up, looking out. He looked for some time, making low and unsteady sounds in his throat. Then he went back and laid down next to Stu again. Outside, the wind howled. The wind howled and screeched. We are going to stop there. I lost my bookmark. There it is. We're going to start 75, hopefully tomorrow night. There's really just these 2 sections left, so we are going to finish tomorrow night. I did finish 74 all in one sitting, which is good, so I can write that down. There we go. And there's no reading tomorrow. Well, maybe. It depends on when my husband decides that he's going to do the caliper. So, if he's not going to do it till afternoon, I may just read. So, look for me. If I'm not on here by 11:15, then I'm not home. Okay? And that way you guys know, and you're not like sitting here wondering what happened. Are we going to read? Things like that. So I'll give myself to 11:15, and then I'll go ahead and we'll say the next time. So tomorrow night. But I think we'll be all right. So we're going to go ahead and end for tonight. I just found I have an alarm on my phone. I don't know why I have. It's weird. Oop, all done. It just bothered me. Anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed. So it looks like Tom and Stu are going to make it back. And Stu was saved by Tom. And technically they really didn't need to send Tom. But if they hadn't sent Tom and had him turn around and come back at the full moon, he wouldn't have met Stu. So everything is happening the way God wanted it to happen, the way Mother Abigail had intended, with everybody going places. So we'll see. All right, I'm going to let you guys go. Follow if you haven't. Thank you for sticking by. I love y'all, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.